Mixing with mic mixing tip, using analog tape emulation in a mix. So in this particular example, I want to talk about how you would go about the process of doing analog tape emulation. And what I'm going to do is give you a condensed version of kind of the full story here of what's going on. And if you want more details, and you go to the website, if you type in MPG Insider, MPG, like you see here, insider.com, this will take you to the main web page. That's the easy way to get there. And if you click on the Mixing with Mike episode 61, that will take you over here to this, and you'll see a full hour-and-a-half explanation, pretty close to that, of what I'm about to describe here. So the basic idea is that if for people who like to put tape emulations in their processing, one of the issues is that it's a bit of a processor hog, and this kind of takes up a bit of some resources. So what I'm going to show you is a technique for using analog processing that allows you to achieve the effects that you're kind of looking for from an analog tape, and be light relatively on the CPU. So we'll start by picking up a couple of tracks here and starting to work with it. So in this particular track, one of the main tracks actually for this particular song, I'm just going to etch out like a looped area that's like about 8 bars or so, and we'll kind of work up a sound. So when you open up a tape emulation, the idea is that you want to create some kind of a consistent sound that runs through all the tracks. Sometimes people sort of randomly use analog tape, and it's somewhat effective, but I think in its most effective use, you're trying to emulate the idea from the way that recordings used to be done, which was the recording was on analog tape. So, and there was one alignment and one bias setting, and the tape was at one tape speed, so you're not mixing all of these things up. And part of the problem with mixing up all of these different things is that you get a lot of mixed messages. So the idea of running everything through a tape emulation is that you're taking the whole track and giving it sort of a coherent sound that is consistent from track to track. So what we're going to start off with here is just by selecting a tape speed, some bias settings, some tape compression, and then basically copy those across and set some input levels. So when we start with this, the input levels are really critically important. So the more transient the material, the lower you'll find the VU meter will go. The more, so percussion, drums, things like that will sit lower in the level range to achieve the same amount of compression. Whereas if you're going to more sustaining sounds, pianos, vocals, guitars, things like that, where you see more of an average level, then the VU will show you the signal your level should be closer to the -3 to 0 range based on the type of tape compression you want. So the idea is we're going to start by finding a good basic sound. So if I work with the tape speed, what I'm going to get is a bit more high end at 15 inches per second, and if we went to 30 it would even be a bit more open. And if I go to 7.5, I'm going to get a bit more low end and a little bit warmer top end. So this actually sounds good on the low end, but just a little bit muddy. This sounds a little bit more open. The bias setting is basically sets a saturation level for the tape. So the more you over bias, or if you select over bias, you'll get a bit of a warmer sound. And if you go to a normal bias, you'll get more high frequency response. And you may get a tape emulation that gives you variations in between, but that's essentially what the bias setting is all about. Now, one of the things you get is the ability to determine how much tape compression. This is done two ways. One is by determining the record level. So I'm going to set this to what I think would be basically a good sounding record level, and then we'll set our flexivity level. Now sometimes with some tape emulations this is set by the actual just the input level. Sometimes it's set by a separate tape compression control. So the flexivity is like the alignment of the tape machine, and tape machine alignments, you would set an input gain stage based off a playback reference. So you'd have a tone reel, and you would set that tone reel. So the lower you set the playback levels, the higher you would need to set the record levels to get unity gain passing through the tape machine. So if you set the playback levels of the tone reel of the what they would call an MRL tape, which is reference tones. If you set it down really low, then you would have to set the record level higher, and therefore you would get more tape compression, of course, based on the tape formulation. So if that's confusing, don't concern yourself with that. What you need to know is that in historically, in early days of tape machine, the reference level was 185, which they call the standard operating level. And then from there, you would get like +3, which is a 250 alignment, +6, which is a 370 alignment, +9, which came in the late 80s. And then you could even go beyond that here. So based on the tape formulation, this would give you more tape compression. It would always give you more tape compression based on going upward in terms of number. So you're really setting the tape compression here more so than you are in the actual record level on this particular tape emulation, but others are different, so you have to kind of follow what is set up within those guidelines. Now, what we're going to do here is on this, we'll set the input levels, and on this particular emulation, this actually feeds tubes which were part of the original Ampex tape machine that this is emulating. Ampex 351, I believe is what it was. And so this is giving you some saturation, but more of a tube saturation, and we're going to get the actual tape saturation from here. So let's go through some different settings. So this is a nominal or a standard level, +3, +6. Here you can see it starts to oversaturate and distort. Much more distortion. And that actually has a really cool tone to the low end, but so if I go with the, in this case, the 250, which would be like a +3 alignment, and I like this becomes my starting point. Now what I'm going to do from here is I'm going to copy these basic settings, and I'm going to paste it into the next channel and start to work from here. So I can use shortcuts for this, but just to show you here in Pro Tools. And now on this, I have a kick drum. And I'm going to set my basic setup here. Now I can go through a variety of different settings. Like I could see whether I like 7.5 or different bias settings or different compression settings. Like and I kind of like the 250. I can actually go anywhere in between. I'm just doing these because these are generally historically accepted levels or measured settings that people would go to. You wouldn't go, you could do a +4, a +5 alignment or a +6 alignment, and there were people who did those things, but generally you wouldn't go sort of in between the numbers here. That gets to be a little bit tricky and hard to measure. But let's start there, and I'm going to paste this into the snare drum sound. And then I'm going to paste this into the overheads. And see here with the percussion, I'm being a little bit more conservative here. With the room track here, I can, I'm just going to paste this in by shortcut. I'm going to drive that a little bit more. So you could hear when I lower this, how the clap opens up, whereas if I go here, it collapses. I'm going to actually paste my settings in here. I can actually swallow up the sound a bit. Seems to be good. Like if I go here, So this still leaves a little bit of snap, doesn't swallow up too much of the sound. And then let's move over to, let's go over to bass here. I'm going to paste in the settings. And I would drive this a little bit closer to 0 as an average level. Let me just paste in the settings here for this guy. And then I got a keyboard here. So this has a little bit of a percussive nature, so I'm not gonna drive it too much. But I have a consistent setting here. So just do a quick check to make sure I didn't miss any of my pasting. They're all set to nominal bias, which is my primary thing there. It was one of the major things I switched off. So now if I take these guys and you can hear what the difference is. So the reason why I don't go to different settings for each thing, and you can, it's not that you can't, but it does create a really consistent thing. Like when you listen to that, it's like it really pulls everything together, adds a lot of depth. A lot of this is due to the tape compression, how the tape compression works. There's also a lot of distortion characteristics. Wow and flutter is one, or two basically. One is what they call like a modulation distortion, because the magnetic particles cannot be equally dense throughout the whole of the tape from beginning to end. There's variations, there's slight variations that creates a little fuzziness in the sound, and that actually helps to create some aliveness or vibrancy. So you'll notice that if you listen to the A-B comparison of this, and I'll just do it one more time here quickly, is that you should feel like this sense of openness and depth and height. And this is partly because I'm going to the nominal bias, so this is opening up more high frequencies, but you can see how it adds an amazing tonal coloration, which is really, really in a positive way, let's just say, for the track. So you notice here it's a bit, doesn't quite have as much depth or height. So there's a consistency here with the sound, and that's ultimately the thing. So how do you now lighten up the processing load? So this is part B of the equation here. So what I'm going to do is, just for the sake of timing, so I'm not going to make this into a big long processing thing. What I'll do is I'll start with my plugins one at a time. So if I were to start with the mono plugin here, I'll just grab this particular section. I'll zoom in on it just so you can kind of see a few things here that are notable, worth looking at. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start with this, and I'm going to copy the settings for this particular plugin. Then I'm going to open them up in the mono version, because this is a mono track, so we'll do our mono tracks first here. And I'm going to paste these settings into here, so there's no shortcut here with the Audio Suite plugins. And then, and if you were doing this for like Logic, you would do a bounce in place, that type of thing. Every application has some way of freezing the settings of a particular plugin and then bypassing it. So we're going to paste this in. It has the same settings here, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to render. Cancel that. So before I do that, what I want to do with these tracks here in Pro Tools is I'm going to create a duplicate playlist. And so part of the benefit of this before processing, so now when I render it, the idea here is that what I want to do, and you can notice how it changes the settings. It kind of softens those edges there. That's a part of the peak reduction that just sort of occurs naturally in this. So I'm going to copy these settings here. So the idea here is that by making the parallel playlist, if I decide that I want to go back, so now I can take this plugin and turn it off or deactivate it so it won't take up any CPU cycles, and then I can go back to the unprocessed file and the processed file. Now you notice that if you look at it, the peaks are reduced. That's part of what analog tape does. So that's like a big part of what we're getting at here. So let me just paste the settings into this guy. I'm not sure if I did that already. Can't talk and chew gum at the same time here. Or I can't talk and text at the same time. I guess I don't know. It's like chew gum. That's like from the 1970s or something. Let's copy the settings here, paste this into, actually this is the stereo track. So I'm going to skip over and do this. So in the end, what we're going to really do is we're going to take this hit off the CPU. That's all we're doing. So I'm not sure I even need to go through the whole process here, but you get the idea. And then I think if there's anything educational here is to see exactly what this is doing sonically, or just from the waveform display, you can kind of see what happens, to the peak. So sometimes kind of changes, and it will change in different ways, in varied ways. So we'll just kind of copy that with a shortcut, paste it into here. And although this seems like it's a bit of a, going to take a little bit of time to do, I think when you want to capture like a basic sound, this is going to save you hours and hours and hours and hours and hours worth of work trying to capture that same depth. And so in the end, this can be worth it if you're willing to, invest the just the few minutes or whatever, half an hour or whatever it takes to go about the process of making this rendering kind of happen. I'm being a little bit sloppy here. There's some edges or some edits. I just kind of grabbed that particular area. Oops. Apparently if you hit the button and then you change the region directly afterwards, then it just switches over to that one. It assumes you want to do something different. So here now I can call up the audio suite stereo version of this. Now we can go through our Kramer tape stereos, make sure that we have all our settings correct there. All right, so that's for this guy. And in the end, when you're done, you'll save yourself the CPU load. You'll end up cleaning up a lot of the other leaving yourself more space, and a faster CPU for the other levels of processing that you need to do. And I think this is really something that should be done first in the processing chain. So I think it's easy to think, well, where should this be done? Should this be done after the processing? And I think the answer there is no. I think it should be done before the processing, because if you think about, historically, if you want to stay within that context, you recorded to the tape and you maybe have done some processing going to the tape, and engineers would have done a good amount of processing actually going to tape when they did it, but otherwise they would be coming from the tape into the console. And so that would be the first stage before hitting the input of anything. So you would do that, and then you would do whatever equalization and compression, whatever processing would be done afterwards. So so getting past the bit of the tedious process, and we're just on the last stages right here, then we can do our quick A/B of this particular section. So you can see here I have all my Kramer tapes set up. It's just a trim plugin, adding a little bit of gain to something. So I got this section, and now what I can do here, this is with the processing, and then I can go back here to my without it. So the cool part about this is that, once I've done this, if I decide that I want to adjust the settings or change something, or I want to go to the unprocessed sound for whatever reason, it's easy for me to go back to the previous playlist, reopen the Kramer tape if I wanted to, adjust settings accordingly, and then burn that in as a new region, and you were good to go. Obviously, you want to do that onto yet another playlist and kind of keep all that processing even. So anyway, there's a quick tutorial, I guess, on how to apply analog processing in a mix, and you can hear how when you set it up right, how it really opens up and dynamically changes the quality of a mix. There's our Mixing with Mike mixing tip using analog tape processing.